Everybody, and welcome to Season 4 of the Undermine podcast by Osiris Media. I am Tom Marshall, your host of these proceedings, and we're near the middle of our season at episode 21, and it's a season where we're exploring Phish in the 90s, and we visit some epic shows of the early 90s, and we're getting closer and closer to our goal, which is the famous Fall 97 tour. So today, Phish has sailed over to Europe for a winter tour in early 97. And our show is in Amsterdam at the famous Paradiso. And to help me explore this European jaunt, I'm here with the amiable and jaunty King of Osiris, my co-host, RJB.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for that introduction, Tom.
You're welcome.
This is our first show of 97, and in fact, the band's fourth show of 1997. You mentioned this Europe tour started in London and then went to Brussels, then Cologne, and then made the stop in Amsterdam. You weren't at these shows, right?
No, I showed up in Europe a little bit later.
Later, yeah, okay. So this is 2/17/97. It has a huge debut, which we're going to talk about, as well as the first hints of the 97 sound. And Tom will tell us about our guest, who is a wonderful person to discuss this show with, or any show with, really. But first, I should say, if you're enjoying what we're doing, please consider supporting our new Osiris Premium offering, which you can join for just a few dollars a month. You can get bonus episodes of HF Pod and Undermine, ad-free episodes. You can listen to all of the previous episodes of Under the Scales, discounts on merch, meet and greets, AMAs, and more. That's 7 things.
At least 7 things. Where can you get that, RJ?
Check out osirispod.com/premium or click on the link in the show notes.
Awesome. Please do that. And I'm going to introduce the guest, RJ, because he's in the waiting room. I have ways of knowing whether or not someone's in there, and he's definitely in there. So when you guys, I was going to say, RJ, when you guys came up with this list, and our guest had something to do with coming up with this list of shows that we're going to cover for this season, I was puzzled a little by the focus on the European tours, because in my mind, Europe was kind of like a breather between important American tours. But that's exactly it. And I get it now in retrospect. I mean, Europe, I was in Europe as much as I could be. And I had young kids and a corporate career, if you could call it that. But for me, it was always a playground. And for Phish, it was kind of more than that. It was a place for debuts and experimenting with new styles and stretching out. And today's guest, Brian Brinkman, is a perfect person to analyze exactly what the band is up to in this show. And I also know why Brian wanted to be involved with this show in particular. And it's the amazing jam in the second set that includes the stunning debut of Carini. But enough of that for now. Brian is an Undermine executive producer and an Osiris podcaster of note, formerly the host of Beyond the Pond. Please welcome from cold storage, as I open the vault, Brian Brinkman.
How's it going, guys?
Pretty good. Was it cold in there, or are you fine from being in the waiting room?
It was the freezer, but I've been unleashed, and much like Tweezer, I've been put on ice for 1997. But exploration is here.
Look who's in the freezer. So, Phish in the 90s, Brian, and we've been listening to a lot of shows, as you well know, and it's striking how the band is changing in the mid-90s. They're getting both very comfortable with their magic ability to communicate and improvise, like wizards on stage, while adopting a new style of play and clearly emanating nothing but like fun and happiness from stage. But in Europe, it seems almost like they dial up the fun quotient even higher, if that's possible. Would you agree?
I would. I mean, I was thinking a lot about the idea of this particular show, 2/17/97, being in Europe, and the idea of this show being a part of their European tour, and the idea that I don't really know when it started, but I know I relate to it. The idea of going over to the old country and the old world as a way to learn a little bit more about yourself, to unleash aspects of yourself that may not come out in America. I know I spent a lot of time in Europe in college, and there's a sense of like, you came from here, but you're not a part of this place anymore. You're an American, and so you can show a side of yourself that, in some cases, is more experimental, more leaning into kind of your inhibitions, while also kind of unleashing a fun side. And I feel at this point where Phish is at in early 1997, they're leaning into that as hard as possible. They're outside of the spotlight. They're not having to play arenas or large venues or cater to their fan base in any sort of way whatsoever. They can kind of just freely experiment in both a way that, as we'll talk about, it's very dangerous. It's kind of terrifying at times. It requires a lot of courage, but I think to your point, Tom, it's really fun at the same time.
I like the old country aspect, and of course, some people have an old country that's not Europe, but I think for the band that does make sense, and it's also like they're playing for audiences that are so much smaller. There's like something is a flip is switched when they go to Europe, and you're right. There's maybe their inhibitions are put on hold or something, but it's crazy. Europe was also about debuts, covers like Soul Shakedown Party and Love Me and Little Red Rooster, but also Phish songs, like we're going to talk about Carini and My Soul, and earlier I think Walfredo, and a little bit later Beauty of My Dreams. And for me, debuts are always exciting, and it's of course great to be there when they happen. But Brian, in your Phish studies, and particularly of the 90s, does dropping too many debuts into the playlist disappoint fans at all? Like, could it potentially dilute the set list with too many new songs?
That's a loaded question. That, like, I think yes, it can create disappointing aspects depending on the listener. I think for me personally, just speaking as how I like to hear Phish, I always want to hear the new ideas that they have and kind of hear the new songs that are kicking around in their heads, and hear how that both inspires them to jam and to experiment in ways that they may not have with an older song, where they kind of have not necessarily a formulaic approach to jamming it, but they know how to get out of the song. I also think, Phish never stops moving, and it's where we get the ups and downs and the really great periods of the band and the peaks, but where we also get potentially challenging transitional periods. And I think the band at this point in early 1997 was coming out of one of those, where they had this great peak experience in late 1995. There was this question of what's next. There were some amazing moments in 1996. And going into 1997, as I've always read about, they write these songs, Rocka William, Walfredo, Carini, as kind of collaborative efforts. And I don't think they necessarily, from what I've read, you probably know better than I do. The impression I have is they didn't necessarily write these songs to be proper songs, but to basically serve as a launch pad for something else, be it Rocka William that allows them to rotate and play different instruments. Walfredo does that as well. Carini, that it's so clearly a jab at a heavy metal song. But as we hear in this first performance, it kind of cracks open this wormhole, if you will, into so many different possibilities for where Phish can go musically.
Brian, little do people know, I think, that you were the originator of the 25 shows of the 90s list leading up to fall 97. So everyone can congratulate Brian for coming up with a great, amazing list. But why this show of these shows? There's I don't know, 10 or 20 shows, right, from that month or so in Europe. Why this one?
Yeah, I was thinking about this show as I was listening to it over the last few days. Just to provide a little bit more context, like what Phish did from 1995 to 1997 is my favorite thing that any band can do. And I think about it in terms of like the Beatles making Rubber Soul and Revolver, U2 making Achtung Baby, Neil Young, the Ditch trilogy, Bob Dylan, every time he decided to throw away what was working and try something completely new that he wasn't necessarily experienced in. Phish walks off stage on December 31st, 1995, and there's this alternate history I always think about that is just the band that we get. And you think about bands from the 90s that last, Phish, Pearl Jam, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, like a lot of what you go and see Pearl Jam or the Red Hot Chili Peppers for today is to hear songs still from the 1990s. Phish consciously decided after that show it would appear to change, and they knew that they had just had this peak experience, and they spend a lot of 1996 kind of playing in a similar style to the best moments of 1995, this big maximalist groove, very tight, didn't take as many risks as they did in 1995. They have this amazing experience on Halloween where they find these interlocking grooves that allow them to play in a more democratic style, which then blossoms throughout November 96, my argument for one of the most underrated months in Phish history. They have the celebratory New Year's Eve run, but then they go to Europe, and the first couple of shows in Europe are they're good shows. As you talked about, Tom, there's some debuts there that would continue throughout the remainder of the year. It appears around this time that they've got a list of, I think, 30 to 50 songs that they've decided to scrap for the majority of 1997. Songs like Tweezer would be played once throughout the winter tour, and they wouldn't appear until August. And obviously, they're going to write all these new songs in the springtime that are going to debut over the summer Europe tour. This show, though, for me, especially in the second set, it feels like that demarcation line where all of this stuff that they've been working on for the last year and change suddenly unveils itself to them, both in a song like Down with Disease that had become a staple of their live repertoire, had really blossomed as a jam vehicle over the previous year, but most specifically in a song like Carini that, just goes in places that it sounds a part of 1995 at its best, but it also has this very creepy underworld type of sound to it that we come to know and love in 1997. And this show sounds like the band equal parts in evolution, but also fully realizing what is possible based on the risks that they've taken and the path that they are charting forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. Tom, I wanted to ask you before, we were talking about debuts, and I think you have a story about a debut involving Trey's mom, right? That was from 97, but not this show.
Yeah, no, I showed up in Europe later for the summer tour, and I think what you're talking about was sort of a mistake she made. It wasn't an actual debut, but basically this is in Dublin, and Dinah, Trey's mom, and I were there for the two shows before Albert Hall. We wanted to go to the Albert Hall show in London, but in Ireland they played When the Circus Comes to Town, and this wasn't the debut of that because it had been played, but it was the first time Dinah had heard it. And I remember I watched her, she was right next to me, and she was actually moved. She was kind of crying. And it was, she loved it so much. And I think she thought in the spirit of new Phish songs that it was a Phish song. And she turned to me very emotionally and she said something like, oh my God, Tom, you and Trey have outdone yourselves. And I quickly let her know that we didn't write it, but man, how I wished at that moment that we did. That's my debut story.
That's amazing. That is great.
Yeah.
It's funny, just as an aside, like my introduction to Phish was Bittersweet Motel, the documentary, and they play that song in there. And I remember being like, I've seen all this goofy, nonsensical, amazing stuff from this band throughout this documentary, but then they just played that song. Like if they wrote that song, I have to listen more to this band. It wouldn't be for like months later that I found out that it was not, it was a cover as well. So So one thing Dinah and I have in common.
Yeah, you both misinterpreted it as a different direction for Phish.
And you both love Trey, so that's good.
Yes, there we go.
All right, I think we'll take a quick break, and then we're going to dive into the show. We got the context. Now we need to talk about the jams. So we'll be back in 1 second. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your investments reflected what matters most to you? At Green Future Wealth Management, the advisors specialize in helping clients manifest their values in their financial lives. Green Future Wealth Management was founded by certified financial planner practitioner and longtime fan Nick Cantrell, named by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors in the country. Whether you are just getting started or have complex investing and financial planning needs, visit them on the web at greenfuturewealth.com. You can sign up for the email list or take the Investing Values quiz. When you feel ready, schedule a free virtual consultation. In appreciation for the amazing Phish community and the incredible work being done by fans across the country, Green Future Wealth Management will be donating 10% of asset management proceeds from new Osiris listener clients to Fans for Racial Equity. Just be sure to mention Osiris when booking your appointment. Create your green future. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Inc., member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc. Cambridge and Green Future Wealth are not affiliated.
And we're back with the famous Brian Brinkman.
Brian, this is really the start of the 97 sound, right? These shows, we talked a little bit about this, but I remember getting these February 97 tapes in, late spring, and it was just an exciting time to be a fan and get new music, but also, I guess in retrospect, we're like turning over a new leaf, there's like this huge jam segment in set 2, but this show, do you feel like this show is more about the improv and the music, or is it more about the idea that this is like the beginning of a new era? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Because, for me, the music, without the improvisation going where it went, I don't think that they realize, how much they have accomplished over the last year, and especially the last 5 or 6 months, in terms of this really conscious evolution that they seem to be going under. I also, I think without this, I don't know what happens at the Hamburg show, and who knows what happens when they get back to America. And, songs like Ghost and Limb by Limb and Birds of a Feather are being written. And these songs that are, so rooted in the kind of Talking Heads style. I think as well, who knows what happened at set break? Who knows what's going through the band members' heads during the second set? But there seems to be, especially in this Carini, this realization of, we were talking about at the top, the fun aspect of what they were going under, where there's a partnership that these guys are working through. They're not evolving so that one band member sounds better than the rest. They're almost evolving in the opposite reason where Trey wants to fit in more with the band. And it's something that, they've been on the road for 14 years, basically, at this point in time. And I would imagine the music that they're playing, especially in this Carini, but the Disease as well, almost seemed insurmountable and unapproachable from a musical standpoint, because you're almost combining the throw any idea at the wall experimentation of summer 1995 that really challenged and aggravated a lot of fans with the funk of Remain in Light and the kind of maximalist sound of December 1995. And that, when it all comes together, is just really exciting to hear for the first time.
Yeah, and I mean this venue, like a lot of venues in Europe, it's a converted church, right? And they played 3 shows at this venue, and spoiler alert, we're going to talk about all 3 of them on this season. I don't know if there's a venue with like a higher percentage of awesome shows than this, but what's when you're going into the first set, or what are some of your highlights from the first set? But also, like, how do you think a venue like this kind of affects the playing?
I think, from a first set standpoint, my big highlights are the debut of Soul Shakedown Party, which, is one of those kind of magical covers that had it come along a year or 2 years early, I don't think they knew how to play reggae as well as they do starting in 1997. And so it really fits the sound. It, I would imagine, fits the space of the venue. It sounds really good. It's one of those songs that nowadays, even when it opens a show, you kind of know that we're in for something from the band. Listening to songs like Divided Sky and Gaiudi was really interesting. Just going back to this, because those are, two composed songs that really feel like a past era of Phish when you consider 1997, but they're playing with so much energy, and they're still attacking that approach with so much kind of earnest. Like there's a real earnest like approach to playing these composed pieces. But my biggest highlight, I think, from this first set is the Billy Breathes solo. It's you hear. I mean, that's a really emotional song in and of itself, just lyrically and just as a rooted song. But then when you throw this solo into it, and Trey's been playing this now for 2 years at this point in time, you really hear him kind of reaching these depths and pushing that song in a very different direction. It's something that I think is something to really behold. What about you guys?
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a really nice segment. And I think the Bathtub Gin is the only other thing. I mean, you get these like kind of, I mean, like the Rupp Gin was the fall before this, right? And I think we've talked about some of the Bathtub Gins from, the 93 and 95, of course, there's a lot, but this is when you really get that like driving jam that still exists now when they play Bathtub Gin. I really love that into Golgi to close the set. But yeah, that the Billy Breeze, I mean, I think it's also like, 1,500 person venue, and there's like some room for some of this stuff, which is great. But it is like a little bit of a new sound even from 96, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the it's wild. I mean, this is the first 97 show that you guys are talking about here, and a season dedicated to fall 1997. It feels like we crossed a threshold in a lot of cases. One of the underrated aspects of 1997 to me is the ballad playing. And I feel like the best years of Phish have really, really strong ballad playing. We talked about this a lot together regarding 2021 Phish, where it seemed like the band was putting something extra into these ballads. They weren't just like a pause before they move into the next phase of the set. And you think about what the Billy Breathes here, you think about what the cast band that's going to close out the set. These are songs that I don't think people initially reach to when they think about 1997. It's probably lower on the list in terms of what they want to hear. But these songs really complement a set and really offer kind of another side to the music that the band is putting forward and really showcase the peak that we're at.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think just thinking about the Lonely 2021, it's sort of a similar role. All right, the second set, it doesn't start as like a jamming set. Squirming Coil is sort of like an odd second set opener considering what comes next. But Brian, take us through this Down with Disease, Carini, Taste, Down with Disease segment, which is just a really, wow, what a stunning set of music.
So I think this does a couple of things that I think are worth highlighting. First and foremost, if you look at Phish throughout the 1990s and their evolution, starting in like August of 1993, they start to realize like what a couplet means within a set, and having 2, 3, 4 songs that really fit together as a segment. And in 1994, you get a lot of these like 622-94 is a great example, where it's just songs weaving in and out of each other. And, the songs may only last for a minute and then they go into a completely new song, but it's this whole contained idea that you as the listener can't just go back to your tape or to your CD, to the streaming device and press play on one song. You have to hear the whole thing. And, as they move into 1995 and the jams get longer, there are, these segments of it, but it's rarely, if ever, the full set. I think like the Fleaser set is a really good example. There's a show from Raleigh that has it's a really good complete set with a Runaway Jim and a You Enjoy Myself and a few other things in there. But 1997 really marks the point where like that becomes the expectation of a great set. And as you guys are going to talk about here as you get into the fall, the 4-song set starts to appear, and the idea that like you don't need any fat in the set. You just need these 4 to 5 songs, and the band walks off stage, even if it's only been just over an hour. We as the listener are completely satisfied. And this set, even though it starts so oddly with the Squirming Coil, it feels like the beginning of that. And it feels like the starting point of, this isn't just a set of music that's going to give you a variety. This is a set of music that is going to tell a narrative, that's going to, via the music, instead of just the songs, is going to elicit a number of emotional reactions from you, the listener. And by the end of it, you're going to feel like you saw this kind of climax, this rising action, the conclusion of it. And you're going to be able to go back and listen to this in the same way that you would listen to a complete album, where you press play and you're not skipping ahead, you're not moving in any sort of way. So, I think for me, when I think about this set, it's one of those I have to listen to all in one piece, even though there are distinct highlights, I would say, rooted in the Disease and the Carini.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I will say that it was the first Squirming Coil second set opener since September 25th, 1991. So,
wow.
And had been played obviously a lot in between. The Down with Disease jam, I think, is more of like a prelude of the Carini. There's, and I don't know, the funk is like so, it feels so rudimentary. It's not
mellow and
it's really mellow.
In terms of like preceding Carini, it's almost like the thing you'd think of last, right? It's
yes.
a real slow, rudimentary funk jam, and you don't even think that could happen after Down with Disease, which is so fast, and the way that they're playing it in the mid-90s is so fast. It's like so fast compared to today's Down with Diseases. It's just but man, it settles into such a beautiful jam, and then slapped in the face with Carini.
It's funny because so much of Phish's jamming prior to this felt disorienting in some ways. And you think about a lot of those big jams from 94 and 95, and it was almost like it had the same elements of like the Dark Stars that the Grateful Dead would play in 1972 through 1974, where there was almost a sense of like, can we get as far away from each other and still be connected as a band? And so like there's a lot of disorienting music, there's a lot of experimentation that's overtly there to almost sound amusical. And when they get into December 1995, there's these big bulbous grooves, and it's not really challenging music. It's really, really fun, but it's also a band like super tight, super locked in. But like I don't think anyone would call like the 12-1-95 Mike Song funk or the Orlando Stash funk, even though they have like these rhythmic elements. And coming out of Remain in Light, it sounds like the band really realizes that like if we play these simple grooves and we're all locked in, we're going to combine this experimentation with this music that people really want to listen back to. And, Down with Disease, you think about this version, you think about the Raleigh version, the Great Went, the MSG version. There's a bunch of others that I'm, just leaving off. But like 1997 is going to be a showcase year for this song as what you were describing, Tom, that like mellow funk groove sort of sense, whereas Carini sounds like, holy shit, not only can we play that, but also like we can incorporate the fun into this, and we can really challenge each other the way that we do in rehearsals in a way that is going to be I don't know, it's going to be what leads to this year being so celebrated 25 years later.
Yeah, and the Carini has so much going in there, there's the like, it's rhythmic, there's funk, there's some just wild parts, there's some really nice mellow part. I mean, it's really multifaceted. It's interesting. We think of Carini as such a jam vehicle now because it so often is. And I think in the early days, like between 97 and when they came back in 2010, there weren't that many versions of Carini that were really jammed out. It's sort of like, just in terms of like long versions, like this is, the only 20-minute version until 2017, which is sort of wild to think about because we think about it as a jam vehicle. But for some reason, like this this night, it was just the perfect. It was like the perfect vehicle for whatever they were feeling, as opposed to like a tweezer, like could have served the same purpose,
It's wild. Like I'm just looking at the jam chart, and between 1997 and 2010, there's 3 additional jam charted versions. There's the 12/28/98 version, which gets kind of dark and eerie, but then there's these 2 that were released on Live Phish, 6/14/2000 and 9/14/2000, that never stray from Carini. They're just really well played within there, so they get the jam chart. But yeah, it's kind of a song that you would think a song that's debuted like this would then just be in the rotation, but it's played until 3/1 and then not again until 12/30/97. It's just kind of looked at as this like ugly stepchild that, was, played, it served a purpose. And then the band was like, okay, we can probably write better songs than that. So let's just not bring that to America. But now it's like one of those songs that this, you hear those first power chords. Like they opened the Dick's Rain Delay show with it because they knew that like these power chords are going to send the crowd into a frenzy. Everyone loves yelling these lyrics, and it's become just a Phish staple at this point.
Yeah, it's man. And by the way, that 12/30/97, which we're not going to get to because fall 97 ended before December, but that 12/30/97 encore with Carini, Black Eyed Katie, Sneakin' Sally, Frankenstein, classic, all timer. All right, that was a long diversion on Carini. But Tom, is there anything else from this set or from that kind of segment that stuck out to you listening back?
No. I mean, this whole show is about the sleeping monkey, right? At the end. Well, maybe not.
It always
maybe
is.
Not. Yeah,
it always is.
It is a good point because Sleeping Monkey will always appear at great shows, and they put it right there at the start of the encore here.
It's a good way for us to stop. Thank you, Brian, for your incredible insight and analysis, and you and RJ make a great team to analyze any show. I've loved listening to you do it for many Phish shows. But that is it for us today. Thank you, Brian. And I also want to give a quick shout out to our friend Cash or Trade. And they're the world's only social network where fans buy, sell, and trade tickets at face value. Check them out at cashortrade.org. And
yes. Before you wrap up, Tom, you've given a lot of shout outs to listeners and your friends who you know are listening. And I haven't done that yet this season. I just want to say hello to Jeff Carroll, who's a longtime HF Pod and Undermine listener. He's been emailing me after many of these episodes and loving the season and encouraging us on. So thanks, Jeff. Thanks for doing that. And Brian, you're gonna have to come back again soon.
I would love to.
Brian, you're always welcome. And yes, thank you, Jeff Carroll, for listening. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us. And remember to review and subscribe wherever you listen and watch. And until then, blaze on.
Osiris.